Well, welcome back. I'm Jason Renault with the Alternative Mobile Services Association. We're here with AMSA Talks and with Scott Althaus of the Cline Center at University of Illinois. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Well, we'll start this conversation. We're going to get to an important report that you have on the changes in lethal force. But let's start by just, Scott, if you would tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got to the Cline Center.
Sure. I'm a faculty member at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign
Hmm.
in the departments of political science and communication. And a lot of my professional work has been focusing on understanding public opinion processes, as well as how citizens keep governments accountable or not, challenges in that accountability process. And starting in 2011, I became involved in the Cline Center's work, which spans multiple projects tracking human conflict processes around the country and around the world. And back in 2017, we laid the groundwork for what has become the Cline Center's SPOTLITE project, tracking police uses of lethal force around the country.
Okay. And Klein Center has a lot of other projects it's doing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So we curate the world's largest registry of coups, attempted coups, and coup conspiracies around the world. We
Wow.
document acts of protest and political violence that happen at small scale. So we document those at the levels of particular cities on particular dates. We have a wide range of programs that leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning, natural language processing methods to extract insights from news reports from around the country and around the world. And then the Spotlight Police Use of Lethal Force project, which we're here to talk about today.
And is that just a little tangent? Is that information about coups? Is that publicly accessible? Is that
Yeah,
used by reporters and political scientists?
that's right. So for all of the data products that we produce, they're aligned with the Klein Center's mission of transforming information into knowledge that advances human flourishing. So we're sort of a data science for the public good research center at the University of Illinois. We create high quality data around human conflict processes that are difficult to track and understand, and then put that data out in the public so that decision makers in the public sector, the private sector, can have highest quality data on which to base good decisions. And our hope is that by improving the quality of decision making in these spaces, we're going to advance human flourishing in ways that really matter for people around the country and around the world.
That's great to hear that just making that connection to the practical application, the getting this data, this work that you're doing used by those in the field. That's really important.
Yep. Yeah, we know that we are data makers at the Klein Center,
Mhm.
and for that data to have any impact, it has to get into the hands of people who are in the spaces and the places where they can make a difference if they have really good insights to develop actionable steps forward from.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about your report. One of the reasons that mobile crisis services would be interested in this is that, of course, lethal force incidences are important in two or three ways for us. One is that there's certainly the sentinel events that get people engaged in mobile crisis work as a profession. And then there are also the events that get politicians and policy designers to get serious about putting mobile crisis teams in place. And so did you have any thought about, maybe not, but did you have any thought about who would be using your data around lethal force when you got started?
Yeah, we did. So we got started back. The idea for Spotlight started in late 2014, early 2015. The Klein Center is tracking protests and acts of political violence and various kinds of civil unrest around the world, and we noticed a big uptick in the United States around the topic of policing injustice. Michael Brown was
Hmm.
shot in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, and as we moved forward and began to see this upsurge in protest activity around the country and the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, we came to understand that if we wanted to know something about why some places had protests in this area and other places did not, we had to know something about what was the population of police uses of lethal force so that we could try to to separate what's the difference between this city and that city. One has protests, the other does not. And as we began to look further into that, we realized that there was no authoritative national database of police shootings. And we just we saw this as both a travesty because it meant that conversations then and still to this day are often driven more by the latest video that shows up on YouTube or on the news than by systematic evidence about what's happening across the population of 18,000 different policing departments in the country. But we also wanted to contribute, thinking about how we provide data that would inform conversations to better understand when and where policing reforms were needed and whether they were working. So in 2017, we convened a national stakeholders meeting here at the Cline Center at the University of Illinois, where we brought together representatives from advocacy groups like NAACP and ACLU, from police leadership groups, including the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Police Executive Research Forum, as well as prominent academic researchers in criminology, and brought them all to one place around one table in a time when conversation across these lines of difference might be potentially intense. But what we found in gathering people is everybody agreed almost immediately on one thing. The data that we had on police uses of lethal force were terrible, and we needed to do better. And that became a very productive day and a half of developing a sense of what would be a kind of dream data set that each of these groups could use, draw from productively to move conversations forward. But it would be a shared source of information. And over time, then we began prototyping at the Cline Center what that vision might look like and what kind of information we could reliably pull together. And we can talk a little bit about where we get this information from. But knowing that the conventional ways of doing this, of relying on policing agencies to report incidents in some structured way, is not working for the FBI. It's not working at large scale, really, at any state in the country right now. We needed a different approach to that. So we needed a prototype, how we could extract information, how confident we could be that it was the right kind of information to get. And that ended up bringing us to the present day. Here on the SPOTLITE project is the only data project that is tracking both lethal and non-lethal outcomes of police shootings, as well as any other use of police force that results in a death. So we're trying to encompass the entire population across the country of every time a police officer pulls the trigger of a firearm, as well as any other use of force that results in a death, and to document those in a systematic way so that we can better understand what's happening around the country right now.
Now, you mentioned the FBI. The Congress passed a law several years ago, maybe a decade ago, that FBI was supposed to collect this data. And what happened with that?
So the FBI has been struggling to collect this data. The last that I saw, they were just around 60% of potential agencies supplying data to their system. But it's still the case that even if they get a broader participation in this program, they're not anticipating releasing these data at an agency level or a level that would really be useful for local communities to be able to think about using it as accountability data to better understand what their policing practices are like. So I don't know the ins and outs of how things were challenged there in the FBI to be able to still not be able to release publicly this kind of information. But certainly in the state of Illinois, where I am, our Illinois State Police were also tasked by law to collect this kind of data. And we've been interacting with them, and it's been a real challenge for them to be able to pull together data reports from over 800 policing agencies in the state using the same kind of definitions and the same data formats. Many of these agencies don't have staff members that could really allocate time to do this. And so it's a big challenge when you're relying on just self-reporting from agencies into central administration units.
And I remember there were the Guardian put together a list, and the Washington Post put together a list, and some private individuals. Why not those? Why aren't those sufficient?
So fatal encounters has been in this space for the longest period of time. They stopped data collection after 2021. It was basically a one-person operation, and it was time for him to retire. The Guardian stopped its data collection a few years ago. The Washington Post announced earlier this year in January 2025 that they would no longer be continuing their data collection operation into the future. And that means that there are only two data providers left in this space that are making their data public. One is the Cline Center Spotlight Project, and the other is Mapping Police Violence. Mapping Police Violence focuses, it's a great effort that they've put together to provide very detailed data, but only on cases that result in a death. And so
Hmm.
there are more than half of the incidents that we're tracking in Spotlight, not as much detail as Mapping Police Violence, but that encompass the full range of incidents where somebody is shot and injured but not killed, as well as incidents where shots are fired by police, but there doesn't appear to be any injury. Suspect got away. We don't know anything more about that, but we can still track that and register that in the Spotlight
So,
system.
so why is the non-lethal force, why is that particularly useful?
So we are tracking intentional uses of lethal force. So
Hmm,
that's
that's what
use
I
of
mean.
firearms,
Mhm.
but also any other use of force that results in a death. Sometimes that might be in a police pursuit where the level of force was not intending to produce a fatal outcome, but it ends
Mhm.
up doing so along the way, or a
Mhm.
taser or something like that produces a death when one is not anticipated. Because these are the kinds of incidents that end up drawing a lot of public scrutiny and attention and outrage in many cases. So we wanted to make sure that we are, through the Spotlights project, providing a consistent definition of what counts as a spotlight incident, what doesn't count, to help to get around the problems that different organizations, different agencies will define incidents in slightly different ways. And this was a challenge with some of the previous efforts to collect data in this space. Fatal Encounters did a terrific job of capturing so many of these incidents. And for a long time, it was the main data provider out there. But they also captured incidents where somebody died in the presence of a police officer,
Right.
not necessarily because the police officer had used force against them. So it was sometimes hard to know how to refine Fatal Encounters data to get down to the specific kinds of cases that many of us want to better understand. And that's where the Spotlight Project starts with a very clear definition to define populations, and then we go forward from there.
So you don't collect, say, deaths in custody or say where some individuals spontaneously commit suicide when, the police are approaching them.
We are looking for evidence that police officers have used some level of force that either constitutes lethal force, so that's pulling a trigger on a firearm, but that would exclude using a beanbag shotgun or some less
Okay.
lethal kind of weapon. We wouldn't include that, or any other kind of force that results in a death. So those are the two areas that we're tracking thoroughly with the Spotlight project.
Very good. Now you have this new report. Let's get into that. Why don't you take us from the top and walk me through it?
Sure. So Spotlight has been tracking police uses of lethal force nationally from 2014 up to now 2023. We just released 2 years of national data covering 2022 and 2023. And we found that when we start with the numbers nationwide of police uses of lethal force in 2021, which were at a high, those incidents had been going up over time from 2014 through 2021. We found that between 2021 and 2023, we had a 24% drop nationwide in the number of police uses of lethal force. And when we look beneath that national number and compare states and so on, we find that it's almost every state in the country
Mhm.
has experienced this decline. So this is a very significant change in at least the occurrence of these incidents across the country.
Oh, fantastic. That sounds great, but and we noticed this, we tracked this out here in our part of the land, and we noticed this dip, but we didn't know why. We couldn't figure out why, because we didn't know there's no change in police policy or training or who was doing the policing.
We don't know why this drop in the number of police uses of lethal force around the country is happening. Our role at the Cline Center is to document these incidents
Mhm.
in a way that allows us to put the data into the hands of people all around the country to begin exploring in their local areas and in ways that would not be possible for our staff, the Cline Center, to better understand the reasons why things are changing, and not only understand the drivers of change, but also to be able to assess if reforms have been implemented in a particular area to see what difference those reforms might be making over time. Right now, the information that we have for these incidents nationally in Spotlight is very limited. We have the date that they occurred. We have the location of the incident. And we have some links out to news coverage so that users of our data can find some additional information. Beyond that, we have documented information about every civilian that's involved in each of these incidents. And we then take the name and an image, if we can find an image, of the civilians that were involved in these incidents, to try to assess from the standpoint of a third-party observer what inference they might draw about the sex and the race of the involved civilian. And again, just trying to capture a sense of what a third-party observer might infer based on what they're seeing in a law enforcement encounter.
Mhm.
And then we are able to report the ascribed race and ethnic characteristics of involved civilians, as well as the sex characteristics from what we can tell.
Yeah. So it's really essential that this information get into the hands of those state legislators or those policymakers, those political scientists to make use of this.
That's right. And so, it's through conversations like this one that we're really trying to reach out and get the word out about the Spotlight data set. Anybody can come and use our dashboards, come to spotlight.illinois.edu and can explore our dashboards. We're constantly evolving our system. Right now, the information is pretty basic, just as I described. But by the end of this year, we should have highly detailed incident data for the state of Illinois up through 2024. And our hope is if we can continue to make progress and find the funding to be able to complete our data efforts, that we will make that level of incident detail available for the entire country and bring us closer to the present so that we can become a nearly real-time continuous monitoring system that can be used by residents across the entire country.
So you said you had data up to 2023. You're about to put it online. This report is about that. But this really shows that it's very important that you continue this work over not just the next couple of years as the Guardian but many years.
That's right. That's right. We want to be able to have a sustainable system for helping local residents hold their policing agencies accountable, but ultimately to also help policing agencies to learn from one another. Right now, we have over 18,000 agencies in the country that don't communicate with one another very well. And so when there's a reform that's working or a new innovation that's making a change in a positive direction, it can be very difficult to see in a larger way what's happening. And one of the hopes with the Spotlight project is that by tracking these incidents across the entire country, we're going to be able to showcase places and eventually agencies that are seeing significant changes in these incidents in ways that might be able to generate some lessons learned for other places.
That is amazing. 18,000 separate agencies, all sort of cooperating, sort of not cooperating with each other.
It's difficult. Policing in the United States is largely a local enterprise. And even though we would like to have national scale data, the structures for funding and supporting the agencies to produce that data are highly decentralized. So it really helps to have an effort like the Spotlight Project to be able to encompass what we can learn by not relying on the agencies themselves, but in our case, by relying on local media reports about these incidents to extract some basic information about each of these incidents, not anything at a level of great detail, but enough to document that an incident happened, that there were certain situational characteristics that were associated with the incident, at least reported by news organizations, and to take that information and put it into the hands of residents, of policing leaders in local communities, thought leaders around the country, to be able to allow them to build out from there, add their own insights, do their own data collection at the local level, to better understand, again, coming back to the reasons of why are we seeing what we're seeing, but also to better understand what is actually happening in our country. I remember a conversation when the Cline Center first released our initial Spotlight data release, which just covered the state of Illinois. Somebody at that release, a civilian, commented to me, well, I would have thought there were thousands and thousands of these incidents based on what I understood in the news. And we found at that time there were just over 700 of them between, I think this was 2014 and 2021. So it helps to provide accurate information that aligns perceptions with reality in ways that we hope will really move things forward in productive ways. And ultimately, our goal with all of this is to try to rebuild trust within communities for their law enforcement agencies and to improve the legitimacy of policing in the United States, which right now is really going through a difficult season.
Yeah, but where there's smoke, there's fire. As you were looking at this data, did you see, were there some geographical areas that were surprising to you, where there was more lethal force or less lethal force?
So, if your members come and visit the Spotlight website, what they will see on the homepage is an incident count map for the entire United States. And it's not surprising that there are going to be more police uses of lethal force in states that have higher population levels,
Mhm.
right? That is pretty obvious. When we were engaging with the different stakeholder groups that really wanted to contribute their insights to our data collection, one of the things that we heard was that incident count data is not terribly useful all by itself, and that any effort to convert that incident count into a rate was going to have some challenges methodologically. There are a lot of nuanced reasons why coming up with simple rate measures that you could compare across all these counties and all these states is challenging. But what we're doing is releasing this incident count data and then moving forward to think about how we can use the fact that we now have a view of the entire population of these events, or at least the population of these events that are reported in local news outlets around the country, to leverage that for new kinds of insights. And one of the insights that we're working on right now, and we hope by the end of this calendar year to be able to release, is to take each of the over 3,000 counties in the United States, and for each of those counties to pull together data on the size of population in the county, the
Mhm.
degree to which it's a rural or urban county,
Mhm.
and then some measure of the level of violent crime in that county. And there are different ways that you could go about doing this. But if you can get those basic elements in place,
Mhm.
then what we can do is to construct a statistical model that looks for any year in any county, what are the observed number of police uses of lethal force that we see, and then leverage the information that we can get from every other county in the United States to create a statistical model of what we would expect that count to be if this county was like every other county that was like it in the country. And that will allow us then to assess whether what we observe in any county in any year is much higher or much lower or about the same as what you would expect based on the characteristics of this county that we see around the country. That will allow us to be able to pinpoint places that have many more of these incidents than we might expect based on population size or levels of violent crime. We might want to better understand what's going on in those places. Are these areas that crime is just different? And so that's why we see these apparently very high levels showing up, or are these places where there's a need for reform and really could be good targets of opportunity for reform opportunities to be brought in. At the other side, we want to understand places that have far fewer of these incidents than we might expect.
Yeah.
Maybe they're already doing something that other agencies can learn from. Maybe that's just showing up because there's under policing in those areas. So we don't draw conclusions about what we're seeing, but we're trying to provide actionable information for local difference makers, might be community members, government leaders, police leaders, to be able to take this and understand how their local area compares to the rest of the country.
Right. So some of these results might be affected by over-policing, but as you said, under-policing might just as well affect the statistics. Now, some you're mostly collecting from public record from the media. There's some media deserts here where there's just no reporting going on. What do you do there?
That's right. So there are a few things with our data collection strategy that are worth keeping in mind. If we were back in the 1980s with
Mhm.
levels of violent crime that we saw back in that period, it's not clear that simply tracking these incidents through local news coverage at that time would capture all of the instances where police officers use lethal force. But we've been in a period for the last many years that has historically been lower for levels of violent crime. And that means that each incident of police use of lethal force tends to be pretty newsworthy in most places. And we verified this for the areas in Illinois where we could compare administrative data to what we were finding through the SPOTLITE system. But it also means that we're heavily dependent on the health of local news monitoring systems around the country. And as you pointed out, we're dealing with a situation where the economic underpinnings of local news have really fallen out from under them. In many parts of the country, especially more rural areas, no longer have the local news infrastructure that they once did. So I think as we go forward in time, we're going to be increasingly concerned about which incidents are happening around the country but are not being picked up in local news because they won't be picked up in the spotlight system very readily. And we want to understand something about the what causes missingness in spotlight records. So right now, the greater areas of concern as far as the state of health for local media tend to be rural areas and tend to be low population counties. The the one plus side of this is those should be areas that have fewer police uses of lethal force simply because there are smaller population, but we still want to understand whether these areas are having more uses of police lethal force than you would expect given the population. Again, with the declining health of local news around the country right now, that's an important question to begin trying to see what we can do something about. But for the moment, we're confident in the comparisons that we've made that we are capturing most, we think nearly all of these incidents, and certainly more than any other data effort has been able to capture up to this time.
Well, this is a really exciting project, Scott. I'm really excited to hear about it and excited to bring it to our members. Thank you so much for visiting with me today.
You're welcome, Jason. Thanks for the invitation to come.